coming today. We're going to have a really interesting presentation about the GM Ringway in a second, and I'll let Andrew introduce himself first of all.
Great. Okay, nice to see everyone. There's a few faces that I recognise, such as Stephen from LinkedIn. I don't think I've ever met you in real life, Stephen, eating your banana. And Jolt, I've met you before at Active City, but not seen you for a bit. Good to catch up. Not sure if there's anyone else that I know from here, but I saw some names on the list. Okay, anyway, just to introduce myself, yeah, I'm here in sort of double capacity in a way, no, triple, let's say. One is that I'm working with Nick at the moment on a little research project to do with the GM Ringway, but with much wider findings for sort of with regards to transport, active travel, well-being and so on. We'll talk about that during the presentation. Second, I am an independent consultant, sometimes working with colleagues with different expertise in transport behaviour change, cycling and so on and basically advising and supporting either local authorities or landscape areas, potentially DMOs, destination management organisations as well, and environmental charities on walking and cycling projects, particularly trails, but also other resources such as apps and so on. But also I'm mainly here today to talk about the GM Ringway, which was my baby, if you like. It was a personal project, which I basically saw turned into reality with the help of all sorts of people. And the GM Ringway is Greater Manchester's walking trail. I'll tell you all about it during the presentation shortly. I basically came up with the idea for the project just as a hobby, gosh, going back about 15 years ago, and then basically got various people on board, worked with two charities, CPRE and the Ramblers, and when we won the Heritage Fund money to implement it, I was acting as project lead. Since then, it's now been taken over by a separate charity. I act as a volunteer, keeping an eye on things basically and advising. So that's my background. So I will get on with the presentation and let's see if I can do the screen share successfully. We just tried it and it worked. So, and wouldn't you know it, it's gone now. 1 second, please. Literally worked a second ago. Okay. Let me go back to this. Yes, here we go. Okay. I want to do it in such a way that I can also see you as well, and I cannot work out how to do that. So let me see if I can do that. 1 second. Just bear with me a second. Okay, can everyone now see the full screen?
I can see it, yeah. That's
very good.
Between slide share and the one where you can see all the slides.
The only problem is that I can't see you while I'm sharing it. If I share it full screen, this is the slight problem that I've got. I cannot work out how to do that.
Okay, so thinking it through, we could just collect all the questions up and ask them at the end if that's the best thing.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just a shame because I like to actually see people's faces while I'm talking.
Like pretend you're actually there. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll go through it, and I'll occasionally come out of this view just so I can check that everyone's still awake and listening. Okay, so the focus of the talk today, thinking of the audience that we have here, looking at leisure travel and so on, I'm particularly focusing on, but I'll cover all sorts of other aspects as well, the fact that the GM Ringway is a public transport integrated walking trail. Integrated with the public transport system, possibly to a greater degree than any other sort of walking trail or major walking trail in Britain or possibly even in Europe. There are some others that have public transport integration, but in this case, we designed it specifically around the public transport network in some ways. Okay, and the reason I included that picture on the very first slide, just to explain what I'll be talking about, it basically shows a group of walkers. That was from a men's mental health group that I sometimes volunteer with, and I was basically leading these people on one of the stages of the GM Ringway, which, as you can see, starts from one of Greater Manchester's tram stations, Metrolink stations. So we were walking on that stage 2, between two tram stations, Sale Water Park and Didsbury Village, and that's just setting off on a very pleasant walk that we had on a lovely summer's day last summer. So what I'll talk about during the session, I'll give you an overview of the trail, basically tell you what it is, the story behind it, the features, how the trail works in practice. So we'll look at one particular stage and I'll explain some of the typical features of parts of the trail, how it differs, say, from active travel projects, how it works on the ground, things that we tried to include. Then talk about the aims. That's really with regard to the Heritage Fund project, when we had to pick particular outcomes that we wanted to achieve, which very much aligned with what we wanted to do, and then what we achieved at the end of the 2-year implementation, which finished last year in 2024. So that was the implementation period. I'll talk about some of the impacts then of the trail, the benefits really, the ones that we achieved that we were able to measure and evaluate during implementation, and then things that we found post-implementation, sort of basically feedback, anecdotal feedback that we've got, and how that led then me and Nick Davis here to initiate a new survey that we're currently running at the moment on the benefits of the trail. And we're looking at some really interesting new areas, such as the impact of leisure walking on general walking, utility walking, and active travel generally, as well as well-being and other factors. After that, I'll look at really just to summarize up for, especially for delegates who might work in, say, landscape areas or local authorities, what the benefits are of having a trail and promoting it effectively for the area, for the locality, whether it's a, say, a national park or a city region, for example. And I'll just also briefly mention, if we have time anyway, some other trail projects that I've worked on recently. One of them is very rural, so it would be good to just have a brief chance to talk about that and talk about some of the different constraints and challenges involved in a rural trail. That's hard to say. Okay, so yeah, first of all, what is the GM Ringway? It's basically a 200-mile, 20-stage walking trail for Greater Manchester, and some specific things about it. It's really focused on, sometimes people describe it as a sort of boundary trail. There isn't, it's not a boundary trail. Someone actually wrote a book, which I discovered a few years after initiating the project, called the Greater Manchester Boundary Walk. I actually have a copy of it at home. It's out of print now. And although it goes close to the boundary or even on the boundary in places, the main ethos behind it was to really explore some of the best scenery that we have, and also some lovely heritage sites as well. It uses existing paths. That's very important. It wasn't an infrastructure project. So those of you who work, say, in the active travel field, it's quite different from that in the sense of we didn't have to or want to create any new infrastructure. That would have cost a lot more to implement. There are interactions, however, with active travel schemes, sort of mutually beneficial. As I say, one absolutely crucial thing is that the whole trail was initiated from my very first idea and all the way through to implementation and since, to work with the public transport network. So as you can see on this illustration here, which is actually, basically it's one of our, that's the design for our interpretation panels, which we have around in each borough of Greater Manchester. You can see that each of the 20 stages sort of starts and finishes at a public transport stop. In some cases they're tram stations, in some cases they're train stations, and in 2 instances where there's a bit of a gap in the network, they're bus stations, for example at Lee bus station, which is a sort of major bus terminal over in the west. Apart from that, as I say, it's mainly tram and train. It's a resource as well to get people walking and wheeling, whatever their level of experience. So we actually changed the sort of subheading under it. We were originally calling it Greater Manchester's Long Distance Trail, but we realised that lots of people might simply want to dip into part of it, use part of it, you know, just for a short walk and that kind of thing. So we rebranded it as Greater Manchester's Walking Trail. Yeah, it's now been fully implemented. It was funded mainly by a £250,000 Heritage Fund grant. We also attracted various smaller bits of funding as well, and also got some sort of, I don't know if you call it pro bono, but some sort of payment in kind or support in kind from other bodies. So, for example, recently, Community Rail Partnerships have got some money from Northern Trains to put information panels, not quite as fancy as this, more basic, at most of the Northern Rail run train stations along the trail route, which has been really great. And we also have a digital panel now, which we've not had to pay a penny for, at Manchester Victoria Station. It was implemented by CPRE, the Countryside Charity, in conjunction with Ramblers. I might tell you a bit more about that. And although it wasn't initiated by the city region, it was supported in practical ways by GMC, where basically bodies across the city region, official bodies, the 10 local authorities and lots of key stakeholders as well. So the story behind it, how did it come about? It was inspired, first of all in my mind, and then the inspiration sort of captured lots of other people's hearts and minds as well by, the really varied, we're very lucky in Greater Manchester had to have very varied scenery and heritage features as well. So looking at the picture at the top, you can see there top left, one of the canals, that's right in the city centre. We changed the route before we got funding to actually include the city centre, kind of to make it more iconic so that people could start and finish the trail in the city centre, and used canals and river valleys and green spaces to get from the city centre to the more countryside parts of the trail. Canals were absolutely vital in this. Although Birmingham, my original hometown, is better known for its canals, Greater Manchester also has lots of them, and they really provide, fantastic sort of blue and green arteries through otherwise built up areas. You can also see that the lakes as well in the west, we have almost Greater Manchester's lakeland, part of a new national nature reserve, the Flashes of Wigan and Lee. We have Pennine Fringe that you can see bottom right. That's up towards Oldham, and actually all shared with the Pennine Way. River valleys, lakes, as you can see, and also some fantastic heritage features, 2 big National Trust properties, 3 now in fact, with the introduction recently of the Castlefield Viaduct, and various stately homes. This is Odsall Hall in Salford, fairly close to city centre, but as well as that we have Dunham Massey and Lyme Park as well. It was inspired by other long distance trails. I'd for several years enjoyed walking long distance trails on holidays, that kind of thing, but after we'd started the idea and were bidding for funding, we found out about other similar trails. Probably the most similar one in the country is the London Loop that was implemented by the Ramblers way before we did the GM Ringway, which goes right around the edge of Greater London. And that is public transport accessible as well, but not quite as tightly integrated as we've done the trail. The other thing was the public transport network. Bottom right here, I think we have a delegate here from TFGM. That's a recent TFGM map, Transport for Greater Manchester, showing the network of train and tram lines going out from the city centre. And that was a really key part of the inspiration. I realised that we could potentially have a trail that linked countryside and green spaces between each of this sort of spider's web of train and tram lines going out, with buses filling in the gaps where necessary. So it moved from an outline concept in my head, lots of research, mapping and auditing with friends, and then later as a member and a walk leader of Ramblers groups. At a certain point after I led a community walk, I became very entrepreneurial about it and was absolutely determined to get it established officially, as I'd seen that lots of other trails were, say, written up in books, but never sort of were then taken forward and sort of faded from memory in various places. I was determined that that wouldn't happen. So I spoke to various people, Andy Burnham, Chris Boardman when he was Walking and Cycling Commissioner, and so on, and public health bodies and so on. Everyone was very supportive. The issue was that because it wasn't an active travel project or a nature intervention project, such as SUDS or, actually reintroducing green spaces, it didn't fit any existing funding pots. That was a big challenge. But thanks to my association with the Ramblers, and especially with CPRE, the countryside charity, we then had a mechanism to officially bid for funding through the charities. So anyway, it was a long process behind that, but eventually in 2023, we won the £250,000 grant that we were looking at. As I say, we topped it up with other funds, including from a scheme called TFGM Cycle and Stride and a couple of other bodies as well. And we then implemented the project over 2 years. It was a very ambitious thing to do. £250,000 doesn't go that far when you're doing multiple project strands, but we did it in the end. It's now permanently established, and it's a 200-mile waymarked and increasingly popular trail for Greater Manchester. So an interesting thing this morning, I was just trying to look up a video which I couldn't actually find. So I was just searching on GM Ringway video on Google, and so many people now are posting their experiences of walking the trail online, either in blogs or in video, YouTube video series and that kind of thing. So it's fantastic to see how it's taken off. So how does the trail work in practice? I'm just going to come out of the screen a minute just to look at everyone's faces again to check I've still got an audience. Yes, it looks like it's going okay. Just one thing, Angela, am I talking too fast or is it okay?
No, no, you're going fine.
Brilliant. Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry, it's just tricky when you
sound
can't see
good.
anyone's
Yeah.
faces. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so going back to how the trail works, here's an illustration. Here's basically a map shot. I think I might get into trouble here as I'm using Ordnance Survey mapping. But anyway, this shows, stage 13 of the trail, which goes from Bury town centre to Bromley Cross, one of the train stations just outside Bolton. One thing you can instantly see about it is that we start the section of the trail there right in the heart of Bury town centre. As I say, that's basically as far out currently as the tram system goes, or regular trains. There's a heritage train line in that area. So basically, we needed to start from this place to the north of Manchester itself, from the town centre. And the policy that we used, the strategy that we used in these cases, was to look for sort of green or blue routes to and from the town centres if we had to come right into an urban area or town centre. Unfortunately we have here part of the National Cycle Network that takes you almost from the middle of Bury right up to this country park and beyond as well. So that was a great way of getting in and out of the town. So just talking through these features, as I say, we use existing paths, lots and lots of auditing involved to check that the paths actually do exist or are in good condition. Generally public rights of way. In places we use, say in country parks especially, or in urban parks, we'll use other paths which aren't necessarily public rights of way but got permission for those. As I mentioned, we start and finish at a public transport node. We're going, as you saw on the other Transport for Greater Manchester map, we're linking one train line here, in fact one tram line that comes to Bury, with a train line that goes from Bolton up towards Lancashire. You'll see as well, quite different from an active travel route, that the route is not it's not the most direct route you could take between these two places. It sort of picks out the most interesting scenery and varied scenery as well along the way. So you have the Irwell River Valley, which has got some lovely scenery in it. It also features the Heritage Railway, the East Lancashire Railway. We go right up to the Peel Tower, really well-known viewpoint with fantastic views over Greater Manchester, right towards the Peak District, even towards Wales. Come down through beautiful semi-ancient woodland with a lovely waterfall in it. Go up to probably the highest village, arguably the highest village in Greater Manchester, a little place called Affetside, very nice country pub, and on a site of a Roman road, and then down to the edge of a reservoir, which is managed as a country park by the water company and by Bolton Council, and finish at the train station. If possible, we don't always do this. We couldn't always do this where it's not available. We try and include make sure on the route that there are refreshment and toilet facilities on the way. This one is quite well catered for. There are cafes at the country park, pubs, and along the way as well, all the way along. But at some stages we sort of do try and provide information that, such and such facility is or isn't available. With regard to accessibility, this is obviously a key issue nowadays. Nick and I were talking at Active Travel Innovations a couple of weeks ago at the conference, and accessibility was a big thread that ran through that conference, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. The thing is, with a walking trail that goes through varied countryside, you cannot make it accessible for everyone. So our strategy there instead was twofold. One is that myself, having worked with a sort of disabled people's access expert, we did as far as possible, we tried to provide people with information so that they could make their own decision about whether that part of the trail is accessible or not. Obviously, it's estimated that about 20% of registered disabled people are wheelchair users. Lots of them aren't, but have other challenges. So it was a matter of describing things like, even say if there's overhanging vegetation that people might need to be aware of, unfenced drops, that kind of thing, providing terrain information on the overall description on the website and so on. And on the app as well, describing individual sections, as I say, where there are particular challenges, so that people can decide, yes, this work looks doable for me or not. The other thing that we did is we identified parts of the trail that were accessible, and we created 10 shorter walks that we promoted very heavily as well on the website, on the app, and in social media. There's one that goes here, for example, from Bury Town Centre, using this nice and accessible National Cycle Network route up to the country park. There's a little circuit of it, and then back again. Some of the routes are more interesting, and we made sure that 5 of those routes were totally step-free. In most cases as well, the walks can be broken into shorter sections by public transport. We do have quite a few inquiries saying, can I make the sections shorter? So we provide information on that. It is on the website, but people can never seem to be able to find that. But we do support people with that as well. As mentioned, we have the shorter routes. So that's basically how the trail works in detail.